So a little bit of my background, since I'm not a researcher anymore, but I used to be. I've kind of been all over the place. I started in genetics, did nanomaterials research, studied neuroscience, mechanical engineering with a focus in robotics. I worked in movie and TV special effects, and then I started building robots, and eventually I started creating facially expressive robots, and that's kind of what got us here. So robots that look like people have been a passion of mine for a long time. A lot of the robots I used to create were wildly expensive, many millions of dollars. They were used in research, and they were used by eccentric billionaires to do other strange things, and that was kind of about it. But on the research side, a lot of the organizations and labs and stuff like that I've worked with, and some of them have been mentioned over the years, were doing autism research. And so I started to get a feel that there could be something there based on the results that we were seeing as I got to support kind of study after study in autism. And so a little bit of history of kind of, where we came from, right? So, like I said, I supported a number of studies at several universities, studies at Yale, studies at University of Twente in Italy, and at Cambridge, and kind of all over the world, people doing different types of autism research. And what I started to see was obviously not just my own robots, but with robots in general, there was evidence that was kind of building that robots and technology could be really useful in working with people with autism. So in 2011, we founded RoboKind, and the first robots we were building were a little bigger and a little pricier, and they were for researchers, and we got them out there, and we started again to see evidence because people were wanting to do autism studies with these robots. And so we then started kind of really thinking that, the product may be autism related and kind of autism therapy or intervention related. And, I have a robot with a face, and so what better to do than teach emotions and social skills with it? And so we kind of hunted around for someone who could write a curriculum, and Pam was the first person who really got it and didn't wash out or drive us so crazy that we couldn't work with her. Not that she hasn't driven me crazy over the years. And so we all worked together, and we developed this social and emotional skills curriculum that Pam's already kind of gone over. And we really started testing as we were developing when we could, and we were fortunate enough to both be able to work through Pam's kind of research center as well as some other autism treatment facilities, and we're able to really kind of start seeing that at least it looked like we were on the right track. And getting a lot of feedback and stuff like that, that we were really able to start helping kids learn social and emotional skills in a lot of cases when traditional forms of therapy hadn't really helped them make much significant outward progress. And to date, we've delivered over 100,000 lessons to more than 4,500 students. And so we're going strong there. And a big part of this is kind of access. And there's a lot of people here probably know some background. There's been evidence since the 90s when people started doing research that robots could be helpful in autism, and that people on the spectrum can engage with technology generally and robots as well as a subset of that technology. And so they've been able to really kind of engage in a way that in a lot of cases they haven't been able to engage with people. And so the question there is, for these specific types of skills, are people really the best delivery mechanism, especially for initiating this type of learning and these types of skills if the students you're working with, if the children you're working with have so much difficulty engaging with people, if they're having meltdowns and significant other behavioral issues, that you can't quite reach them initially. And so what we've seen to date, and what I think is the case with a lot of this technology, is that these robots are a significantly helpful tool that can really expedite and bridge a lot of these kids into really having a way to learn that they haven't been able to traditionally working with people. So, I have some research background, and so we approached this a little bit like a research project initially. We tried to identify some problems because we weren't going out there with the idea that we'd create this robot and create a curriculum and we would solve autism. That's, it's not going to happen. There was research out there, but nobody really had anything kind of formally and broadly built as a curriculum to teach social and emotional skills and behavioral skills to individuals on the spectrum. The other thing we saw is of the robots that were out there being used in research, they were a lot of one-offs, and then some that were starting to be developed into product were still very expensive and not necessarily durable enough to be used unsupervised, semi-supervised, things like that. And so, we put a lot of focus into durability, safety, things like that, so that if a kid, grabs the robot, it's fine. He's not going to break anything. If falls off a table, it's not great, but he's probably not going to break anything. So that's kind of where we started on the hardware side. The other thing we looked at is, while the research is helpful in directing a lot of the decisions that I make, the majority of these kids are in the public school system. The last statistic I saw was 92% of these kids are in the public school system, and they just don't have great access to quality interventions. As Pam said and Shelley said, a lot of these schools have teachers who aren't really trained to help kids with autism. They're in classrooms that are kind of overwhelming and crowded, and a lot of these kids who have meltdowns regularly, if you've got 10 kids in a class and each individual kid is having a meltdown a couple times a day, the teacher's not really going to have the opportunity to do much teaching anyway. And so if we can help these kids start to self-regulate, then it changes the dynamics of the classroom. And so that's one of the kind of fastest and most positive things we've seen when kids start working with Milo in our program. And so, as I said earlier, a lot of these kids have trouble engaging with other people, socially. And so if that's the case, if you have someone who really can't sit down across the table from you and engage, it's going to be hard to teach them anything. And I think the reason Pam's research is really important and looking at engagement is really important is I think it's the first and kind of most critical step in any type of education. Because if you can't engage someone, you're not going to be able to teach them anything. It's just that simple. And so we're at a point now where we can really show that we can engage a lot of these students very quickly in ways that kind of nothing else has really been able to. So our goals when we were starting to create this were a facially expressive robot that was affordable for schools and durable enough for schools. I'm obviously biased because I've been creating robots with facial expressions of some variety or another for almost a decade now, and so it's kind of my personal life focus. But at the same time, I think when you're trying to teach social and emotional skills, that having an expressive face, as well as all the other supportive material we've created, is a pretty critical element, because if you are trying to teach someone what a smile looks like and how to recognize that and things like that, I think it's really good if you can show them a smile and do it in a way that's consistent and things like that. The social and emotional skill set deliverable by a robot. And again, kind of to Pam's point, developing a curriculum like this is tough because you're generalizing a lot of things, and you've got to know that every piece of it's not going to work for everyone, but hone in on something that works for a lot of people at any given time. And remember that in a lot of cases, this program is going into schools, whether it's urban or rural or suburban or whatever, where a lot of these classrooms don't have professionals who really know what they're doing. So you need to develop a course that is basically kind of guided by a paraprofessional of some sort, a parent volunteer in some cases, and that's kind of what the environments we're working in. And then to that point, training was a really important thing for us to develop, and it was took a lot of trial and error. But how do we train someone in an hour to be able to at least have the baseline ability to just facilitate administering this program? And we have much more training than that, but we tried to kind of, someone who all they know how to do is turn something on and off as their starting point. How do we train that person to be able to administer this and facilitate it? And so that's kind of what we've done. And then, monitor and report on student progress. And back to the training also, in addition to kind of the initial training, we've used the facilitator manual that Pam created, as well as some of the additional materials now to create additional trainings, as well as we're releasing basically a kind of video on demand version of it. And the other thing we figured out is with teachers, they're busy all the time, so how do you incentivize it properly? And so we're working with a number of schools to allow them to get continuing education credits so that they have some incentive to actually go through it and learn this stuff, and it makes them better able not just to work with the robot and the student, but better at understanding the students they're dealing with who are on the spectrum, and so, or working with. And so anyway, and then monitoring and reporting. And so, we have this robot, and we're doing something that is very consistent in the way it's being delivered. And a lot of these classrooms, traditionally, there's very little data. In clinical settings, you've got, to Shelley's point earlier, you're constantly doing paperwork and writing stuff down and stuff like that. In these public school classrooms, these kids are getting tested. In a lot of cases, the required minimum is once every third year. And so what you're getting there is, a snapshot of how that kid's doing on that given day every third year, and you're not really building up a profile. And so if these students are working with the robots 3 to 5 times a week, you can really start to monitor progress and see as they go through the program, are they learning, first of all, and if they are, what's the trending in their progress look like? Because a lot of these kids are going to have kind of different levels that they're coming in with, and with some kids it's going to take a lot longer for them to learn the same things as maybe some higher functioning kids. So that's kind of where we are. And so in terms of the outcomes we've seen to date, talked a lot about engagement. Students engage with Milo quickly. This picture was great. We were at the Orange Grove Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they brought a student in to just kind of see how he'd react to Milo. And he was immediately engaged and immediately kind of taking direction from the robot, responding to the robot, mimicking the robot, things like that. And this was a student that was, traditionally minimally verbal and didn't have much behavioral problems, but still didn't engage with people that well. And so this is 30 seconds into seeing Milo for the first time. So that was pretty incredible. So, and then we're seeing kids who are making significant progress when traditional forms of therapy haven't really worked well for them. And so, this is where we're seeing kind of an acceleration effect for kids that take well to working with Milo, and it's not everyone. We've seen in the field in reality that something like 50 to 60% of kids seem to be appropriate, if you will, to work with the robot. So, but that's still a pretty significant amount, and so we're seeing kids who have, had significant behavioral issues, violent behavioral issues, non-communicative, and in 4 to 6 weeks, the very first kind of lesson set we go through are calm down techniques. After they kind of go through the games and the intro to get used to working with the robot, are these calm down techniques. And we're seeing kids who are biting, kicking, completely melting down, in a lot of cases multiple times a day, go from that to learning to self-regulate. And then once they've learned to self-regulate, once they're not in the midst of a borderline panic attack, consistently and persistently all the time, everything else comparatively starts to come a lot easier. So that's some of the amazing things we've seen, and we're now at a point where, with the number of students we're working with, this isn't just kind of a small percentage or a novel amount, but we're getting these stories regularly and also seeing it in the data as well. And we're working on ways to broaden the scope of the data we're able to collect for a number of reasons I can talk about. But we're seeing real and significant changes and benefits in these students. And what we've seen is a lot of cases, the data we're collecting versus the other types of reporting we're getting back from teachers and parents and things like that may kind of under-reflect how much progress these students are making, where we'll see kids who are getting low scores in terms of the quizzing we're doing on these, like say the greetings, for instance, in terms of how they're scoring there, but then we're hearing back from teachers and parents that those students who may not be doing that well with respect to the quizzing right now, in practice, they're getting done with Milo and they're going and they're practicing their greetings at home. And they're trying to figure out how to generalize and things like that. And so that's something right now we're not capturing well, and we're trying to figure out how to improve and expand. So engagement, why does Milo work? We're talking a lot about engagement all the time. And I've kind of, feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but it's important. Because again, if you engage someone, you can teach them something, and that's everyone. That's not just kids on the spectrum. So I'll get into some of the specific kind of impacts we're seeing, the changes, the benefits we're seeing with a lot of the students we're working with. Behavior, and so this is where we're seeing, with the calm down modules and some of these other, social interaction, conversational dynamics lessons, rapid decreases in disruptions and meltdowns, increases in ability to concentrate and focus, and that can broadly end up letting a kid who hasn't really been able to sit in a classroom start to actually sit and function in a classroom and start receiving a real education, which is pretty incredible.
The other student, who was far more behaviorally challenged, a lot of biting and pinching and hitting people, totally gets it. Totally gets the sustained way of making sure the person looks at you, responds back to you. How he greeted people before was he'd either bite them or hit them because he didn't know how to get their attention, how to interact with somebody. He's just more comfortable in his own skin.
So we interviewed that teacher in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, only 6 weeks after they had installed Milo and started working with it. And we have like an hour and a half of interview with her. And so that's one example of about 4 she gave of kids that just in the first 6 weeks really responded well to working with the robot and going through this curriculum. And she said it basically changed the entire dynamics of her classroom. So that's something that's pretty incredible. And it's a lot of anecdotes, but we have data that kind of more broadly reflects this as kind of something that's generalized across a lot of kids. And so emotional understanding, we're teaching social and emotional skills. So increased comprehension of emotions, both learning how to express themselves effectively, where you get into expressing, feelings, wants, needs, things like that effectively, which especially going back to some of these lower functioning kids who may have been previously non-communicative and sometimes violent, a lot of the times the violence stemmed from not being able to communicate their wants, their needs, they're hurting, something's wrong, stuff like that, and they don't have the mechanism and the skill set to express it, and so they, hit people. So that's where we're seeing a lot of things, and then even at the higher kind of functioning level of kids, we're seeing, just the ability to start really comprehending a little more deeply what people mean when they're speaking to them, and consequently the ability in some cases to not be so literal when someone uses an idiom or something like that, which you see, sometimes with individuals with autism. So, and then, they become more outgoing in a lot of cases. They're willing to engage socially, and they're doing a lot less self-isolating. And so that's pretty amazing. So vocabulary, obviously if we're working with a kid who is nonverbal and they're starting to become somewhat verbal, their vocabulary is increasing dramatically, but more broadly, as they're learning some of the social vocabulary and how to contextualize it correctly, they're able to engage more, express themselves more readily and more easily, things like that. And so that's nice. This is a little bit longer video. It's kind of follow-up. There was a news piece with that same teacher, one of her students, and a parent, and you can kind of really get a sense of the impact.
Sometimes you can figure out how someone is feeling by looking at their mouth.
It's just amazing how much impact that this doll has on him. Milo's really changed Logan a lot as far as eye contact, waving to people, his emotions come out.
So Milo's a robot that is programmed to show facial features and show body movements and teaches kids who don't interpret those instinctually.
Most people smile when they feel happy.
Like a typical infant, a typical neurotypical person will pick up on facial features and understand what that means. Milo works with kids who don't understand that. And the purpose of getting Milo is a pilot program for us to work with students with autism on the spectrum. The first time we introduced Milo, Logan was like super cool in that they said something about mom, and he repeated mom, which he had never said anything like that before, so that was kind of cool.
Now he makes proper eye contact. He waves to us. He waves to his friends here at school.
Can I have a hug? Oh, I get a kiss? That's even better.
And I think that Milo has really brought out his personality. And it's just so amazing to see how much he has grown in the past year.
I'm happy.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's phenomenal that in 2017 we have a robot in our school. You know, it's just kind of cool. But
Look, it's a tablet.
you know, because he does the same thing exactly the same way, and he's like, you know, he's got the funky looking hair, and he's just like interesting. It's a phenomenal piece of equipment. So
It brings tears to my eyes. Because I'm getting to know my kid. He's actually coming out of a shell that it seems that autism had him in. Makes me happy to see him happy.
Sometimes emotions are called feelings.
Okay, so yeah, you see, excuse me, you know, this has a broader impact, obviously, than just the effects on, you know, the individual student learning skills, because it changes the dynamics of the classroom, like I said, and then home life. And so a lot of these kids are, you know, they start making this progress, and in a lot of cases, they're making this progress when years of therapy previously have made comparatively very little progress, you know. And I think it starts changing the expectations for what's possible for some of these students. When they're making incremental progress kind of over years, and then, you know, in the first year, you're able to kind of move a kid who has, you know, been through a significant amount of therapy from still, again, nonverbal, non-communicative, not really able to engage, interact in school, at home, with their family, with their classmates, and let them kind of start doing all of those things and kind of start being a kid. It has a pretty broad impact. And so again, on the home life, obviously, you know, you obviously the parents start recognizing this. If they have siblings, you can change the dynamics there, because in some cases, unfortunately, all the parents are really able to do is focus a lot on their kid with autism. And if they have other children, you know, if the kid has other you know, siblings, they may, you know, feel some resentment because all of the attention goes to the student with autism, because they need so much help all the time. And, you know, the other thing is you see, again, going back to the behavioral stuff, sometimes with the self-regulation and things like that at home, a lot of these kids are, you know, want rigid schedules, and can, you know, one thing that can trigger significant meltdowns can be just a change in schedule. So a doctor's appointment instead of soccer practice when you've always got soccer practice on this day at this time. And, you know, again, things we've heard from parents is, you know, we used to have things like this, and we'd have to prepare an hour or 2 hours to deal with this change in schedule, because the meltdowns were that significant. And now, you know, we do this. He goes, he sits down, he takes deep breaths, he counts to 10, and you know, then we go. And so now it's 5 minutes instead of an hour. And so you're giving families back significant portions of their home life as well in a lot of cases. And so this was Celia's mom, who or was one of Shelley Margot's patients, you know, said after a lifetime of hearing your kid can't do what every other kid is doing, sorry, I have a dry throat, to be able to hear improvement is life-changing. And so actually I think the next slide is a video of Celia's mom. So I'll let her say it.
Celia has autism. Those early days, I would not wish it on anyone. Milo was the life changer for us.
You can tell me what to do.
With Milo, Sumi would watch, listen for his question, think about it, and respond. Sumi never did that in a normal conversation before. After a lifetime of hearing that your kid can't do what every other kid is doing, to be able to go in and hear improvement is life-changing.
So, yeah. So the other side of this is compared to traditional therapy, Milo is a lot cheaper to operate in reality, and especially in school districts, rural areas where they don't have access to much therapy. Therapy can be really expensive, or they have to cart these kids out of district to specialty centers and things like that. And so in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we installed one robot in an intermediate unit, and he was working with, I believe it was 16 students in their first year, and 5 of those kids made so much progress that they were able to move from the intermediate unit back to general special ed in their home district. And when you look at all the costs around that, and we've had this number verified, by the way, by the education comptroller in South Carolina, you're saving significant amounts of money, because these intermediate units, they were spending $80,000 a year per student, whereas the regular special ed is about $22,000, still not cheap, but a lot better. And some of these kids were even able to start part-time attending mainstream classes and receiving a real education. And so, you look at, aside from these kind of, this good big grand number, the longer term impacts, if you think about, the economic side of it, the difference between, for the individual, between needing to be potentially cared for their entire life to being able to be at least even semi-independent is pretty significant. And the reality is the costs get bared, by all of us, by society, and so we end up kind of the way we're helping these individuals really has a rippling broader impact that I think is I'm very, very proud of. And so, like I said earlier, one of the things we're really trying to do is expand reach, is expand the ability of people who don't have access to anything, in a lot of cases, in any type of therapy, to kind of get access. And so to that end, we're starting to, we introduced different skin tones earlier this year, and in about a month and a half, we're introducing our first female characters and things like that, so that people have something they can more closely relate to, and that's been something that is really important to, I think, be able to do. And then, on the kind of the issue of kids not having access, we have a great recent example where a school in Paiute, Utah, which I promise almost none of you have ever heard of, because it's a little rural area outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. The entire school district has 300 kids, and they have one student with autism. And the problem they were having is they couldn't find therapists who were willing to drive all the way out 4 hours each way, more than, I think it was like once every 6 weeks. And so the student had no access. And they got one Robots for Autism program, one Milo to serve as one student as of right now, and there will probably be more eventually. But we have a lot of instances of kind of faster adoption in areas and in ways we didn't expect. And one of that has been kind of areas that don't have access, whether they're inner city or very rural. They're faster to adopt, I think in a lot of cases because they don't have the resources to support broader programs, and because they don't have really any history of anything, so they're willing to kind of jump in a lot more quickly. So that's what I've got. Any questions? I'm sure there are.
You said that you're developing different skin tones and different genders for different individuals so that it's more relatable to different people. Have there been any studies just testing whether that difference matters and whether there is like a significant difference in, like, for example, someone with lighter skin tone is more receptive to a Milo with lighter skin tone, or if like you could mix and match?
You can definitely mix and match, and I think it may be less important for people with ASD than maybe for neurotypical population, and so that's something now that we're creating these we want to actually study. And on top of, I mean, anecdotally, I've been in classrooms and seen kids who, when they, African American kids, and they see a darker skinned Milo, they immediately say he looks like me. And so anecdotally, there's a little bit of something there. Not that that is scientifically valid, but to your question, there hasn't been anything like this before, so I don't think anyone's been able to study it, and so we intend to.
I just want to ask that there are a lot of studies in human robot interaction research. It's been an area which is active in research for more than 20 years. So at least those studies suggest that many autistic children, they are not sensitive to specific anthropomorphic feature of the group. But as Richard mentioned, that anecdotally I can sense that an African American kid would be able to connect with a darker skinned robots maybe faster. But again, like I don't know if there is any research evidence on that. But the HRI research shows that kids are not sensitive to anthropometric features of the robot.
Is that a function of like developmental cognition, or is it a function of learning history? Is the real question. Now that I'm like getting into more specificity as to why.
I really don't have the answers, but like if you see the varieties of robots that have been used in autism research, you will see different kinds, and all of them conclude the same thing, that kids love robots. Yeah. So to me, it's the machine that attracts them.
I do know from our experience in the commercial world, there is an affiliation motive associated with prototypical types in the consumer world. So I don't know how that translates into the reactions of autistic children. But in the commercial world, there's a sense of male, female, dark skin, light skin, and so on. From a consumer perspective, there is an affiliation.
I would like to see if there's a difference, and if so, why.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes.
Hi, so how are you protecting the data that you're collecting about these children?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Everything we're doing with respect to data collection, the way we collect, transmit the data, we use kind of HIPAA and FERPA guidelines as a starting point. We didn't think they were good enough, and so everything we're doing is encrypted live on the robot as we're collecting it, is transmitted over SSL, encrypted again, and then the personal identifiers about the kid are not stored with the data itself. They're stored in a separate database, separately with separate encryption keys and things like that. And so that's kind of the kind of state of the art right now in terms of doing this. And there are certain things we haven't done to date because we haven't quite figured out how to to protect privacy at the level we'd like to. We early on thought about recording every session and things like that, doing emotion recognition live, but would have required kind of cloud services to do it, and couldn't find services like that were themselves HIPAA compliant. So we've backed off of that until either that we can get someone to do it for us, basically, or we can create it ourselves. On the data side, we've been really careful. We're very intentional about the way we're making sure that everything is as secure as possible, move slow when necessary, because we're We can do lots of things. We're not storing in my labs and with my researchers and stuff like that we're not pushing to product for privacy reasons.
Can you collect, is there a data collection system through Milo?
Yes. So every student gets his own profile, his or her own profile. Each teacher also gets their own profile. So what we've done is basically there's a facilitator profile, there's an individual student profile, and so you can have a student assigned to multiple teachers and classrooms and things like that. And you have each session is individually tracked, and we're looking at, obviously, are they, when it gets to the quizzing sections, are they correct or not correct? How long does it take them to respond? And a bunch of other kind of metadata around that the robot's able to collect and or the iPad's able to collect. And so that's how we're kind of doing this data collection. And so we think it's important to be able to track progress and see real trending information and stuff like that, because these kids need a lot of practice. And I mean, to Pam's point, with some of these kids, they're starting at zero. They're starting with a little to no understanding of some of these topics we're teaching, and then these course modules themselves get harder, but we're looking for some level of mastery. And so we can start seeing incremental progress as these students work through these lessons and get the repetition that they need and stuff like that.
I imagine it varies from like case to case, but is there a specific criterion that is set before you move to the next like level in the teaching program? Like, is there a specific percentage correct for a certain number of trials that?
It varies per lesson. I think it's somewhere around 80-85% is our kind of average in terms of mastery criteria. In a perfect world, it would be, and that's we allow kids to retry questions if they get them wrong, and so that's first attempt 80-85%. That's another thing that we've, I think, done pretty well is if a student gets something wrong, the robot always gives really positive feedback. We'll kind of re-explain an idea, re-show some of these video modeling or these modeling videos and let the student try again. And so that's something that's been good and something where the robot's able to be really consistent again and positive. And we think it's important to make sure that we're always giving these kids kind of positive feedback and encouragement, even if what they're doing is a really difficult task.
Is there a difference between, like, other than just letting the person try again, is there a difference between the way Milo responds to a correct answer and an incorrect answer?
Yes.
Yeah. So
there's a hierarchy.
There's
a hierarchy. I haven't looked at it in a really long time. But if there's one response, no response, we'll like bring it over, we'll have them go through the loop again and have them do it, and then we'll explain it. We'll break down the task. If they get it wrong, we'll break down the task even more for them so that you're giving added explanation and then trying it again. So there's a hierarchy of wrong response and there's another hierarchy of right response.
the word is adaptive. It adapts to the response of the student and takes them where they need to go.
Excellent.
So here, let me start one thing and then I'll get to your question. I've talked a lot about the robot and some about his capabilities, but let me actually kind of show something, so you can see what the robot can do in terms of movement especially. So he's going to kind of show his facial expressions and gesturing and stuff like that, and we'll go deeper back there during lunch or one of the next breaks and maybe show some of the specific lessons in a more full context so you can see what it really looks like. So you want to ask your question while he's doing it, or? Okay. So we have in the past, and then we kind of broke it, and we're in the process of redoing all of our APIs and stuff like that. So in another I'm going to say 6 months. Ideally, it would be 3, but realistically, 6 months. We'll have a full API as well as a simulation environment where you can have a virtual robot and the APIs are in full parity. So any development you do in the simulation environment, you can then run identically on the robot. And so, are we out of time? Or, well. Oh. Sure.
What I get is that you're the designer of Milo.
Yes.
I love Milo. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful robot. But I'm personally attached to all robots.
Sure, I am too.
Because I don't design robots, I program them.
Sure.
And you also are the developer of the idea that a robot should go with the curriculum.
Yeah.
Personally, I like the second part better because what I feel like that I have said in many robotics conferences talking about, heard many talks related to robots and autism, and I saw the same level of enthusiasm, same sort of engagement,
Sure.
no matter what the robot is. So
Yeah.
that all makes me very excited about the future of robot-mediated intervention. But what I found unique about your approach is that it comes with a curriculum.
Sure.
Again, that's your idea.
Yeah.
So, as a roboticist, aside from the business side,
Sure.
to push the whole discipline, to promote robot-mediated behavior intervention, do you think that, as a community, we should try to use this curriculum on different robots and see whether it's the robot which is making the difference or the curriculum and making the curriculum more and more advanced and see whether the curriculum which is making the difference, the curriculum delivered through any sort of machine. So that way, a kid who is maybe like sitting in a rural Africa, there's no one who can afford a Milo, but they can build their own machine and deliver the intervention, deliver the curriculum through that machine. So what is your thought on that? Should we stick to the specific robot? Because
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have a bias, but trying to go beyond my bias, I think that a lot of people can see a lot of benefits using technology more broadly in autism. I think the curriculum itself is important, and to your point, this pairing the curriculum and the robot is not something that's really been done and was one of my goals because I did see a lot of really positive research, but no way for the broader population to access it. To the kind of broader goal of making this type of intervention more accessible, I think it would be good to test this curriculums like it, through other media, basically, whether it's robots or virtual characters, things like that. To the kind of virtual character end, I know there has been research like at the Media Lab and stuff like that, where they've looked at robot versus identical, say, on-screen character, and with identical curriculum of other type. And when you move it on screen, even if it looks the same and moves the same, you see a dramatic drop-off in attention span and engagement and things like that. And so I think having the physical object, if you will, is important, and I think there's a lot of research that bears that out. Again, this is a completely biased statement, but I'm really of the belief that especially with the emotional recognition portion of our curriculum, that having something that has the hardware capabilities of simulating and showing these emotional expressions is really important, because it's hard it's hard to look at a robot, whether it's another humanoid or two little yellow balls stacked on top of each other, but if it doesn't have a moving face, how do you show happy in a way that is generalizable and has fidelity outside of the little lesson? If you're just hopping around to show excitement, then you're showing excitement at the level that a faceless dog would. And we're trying to help these individuals really specifically learn to interact with other people and generalize it. And so I think you need those capabilities and that hardware in order to teach those things effectively. And video modeling obviously helps, but if it's on the robot, then they've got something they're already willing to engage with that is showing them how to do it.
Richard, I just want to add to that. Therapists have been doing the curriculum for 6 years. So I think the robot does bring the missing piece. That being said, there's still an integrated piece that needs to be added to all of it to make it accessible to everyone to get the results that we're looking for.